Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back for day one of Aetherdrift previews. And in this video, we're gonna look at the rares from the day because we got a lot of cards to look at today. So I've divided it up into multiple videos. Already, I've got out there a mythic rare video for you to look at, and I'll have a common and uncommon one for you to look at as well. But before we dive into the rares, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Aetherdrift preview season and beyond. All right, let's dive into our rares. So first we've got the Verges from the set. We've got Bleachwood Verge, Willow Rush Verge, Wastewood Verge, Sunbillow Verge, and River Pyre Verge. And all of these are going to be cards that are going to be incredibly important in Standard. They're simply better basic lands for everyone. And because of that, I think you should get a playset in whatever color you prefer to play so that you can add these to your mana base. The mana bases right now that are doing the best in terms of efficiency are the ones that already had Verges in it. So now we've got Verges for all the color pairings, and I think that's just going to put Standard in a better place because everybody's going to be on an even footing. Our next rare of the day is Muruganda Raceway. So it's a land and it has start your engine. If you have no speed, it starts with 1. It increases once on each of your turns when an opponent loses life. Max speed is 4. So at the beginning, it taps for 1 mana that's colorless, but once you reach max speed, you get to tap it for 2 mana. So I think this, in the right deck, is a nice include. It's probably not going to be a 4 of anything, but a couple extra copies of it to give you a boost in that mid to late game after you've gotten to max speed, I think makes this a good card to consider in Standard. Certainly in any deck that you want to ramp in. All right, so let's look at the rares by color today. So we'll start with our white rares. First, we've got Bulwark Ox. For 1 and a white mana, you get an Ox Mount. That's a 2/2. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And you can sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you can also saddle it for 1. So really nice card here. It has that ability to give other cards that you have in play, those creatures, protection if they have +1/+1 counters on them. And that can be a really good ability in Standard. And the fact that not only is it hexproof, but also indestructible. So even if your opponent is playing a board wipe and half of your creatures have +1/+1 counters on them because Bulwark Ox has been able to put them on them, I think that is good enough to say this card should see Standard play. And it only has a saddle cost of 1. So for the most part, any creature you're going to be able to play in Standard right now is going to serve as a card that is going to go ahead and saddle this. And if you remember from the Duskmourn set, and I think I'll probably be coming back to this a lot over the course of these previews as we look at vehicles and mounts, there were a lot of cards in that were survivor cards that if you tap the creature, you got a benefit after combat. And I think those cards are going to play really well with cards like Bulwark Ox because you're not only going to be able to go ahead and crew it for a low cost, but then also give that a +1/+1 counter. And then if you need to protect it, you can always sacrifice Bulwark Ox. Our next card of the day is Basri, Tomorrow's Champion. For 1 white mana, you legendary creature that's a human knight and is a 2/1. And for 1 white mana, you can exert Basri and create a 1/1 white cat creature token with lifelink. Basri also can be cycled for 2 and a white mana, and when you cycle this card, cats you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Now, we got in Foundations a lot of cat cards, and because of that, I think this is certainly a card that may go well in a cat build. The ability to create them by exerting Basri, I think, is a nice benefit, but that ability, again, to give all your cats hexproof and indestructible, that cannot be undersold as a very powerful ability in Standard and in most formats in general. Next, in blue, we've got Venwext, Verbose Host for 1 and a blue mana. You can leisure creature, that's a homunculus, and is a 0/4. It also has Start Your Engine. You have no maximum hand size, and when you reach max speed, if you draw a card, draw 2 instead. So really powerful ability on our Verbose Host, where you're going to be able to, once you reach max speed, every draw now is draw 2 instead of draw 1. And I think that will make this playable in a deck that's focused on drawing a lot of cards. As long as you can get that damage in consistently against your opponent, that ability to draw 2 cards every time is really powerful. So I expect to see this somewhere in Standard. Next, we've got Repurposing Bay for 2 and a blue mana. You get an artifact, and you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice another artifact. And you get to search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. So I think this is a slam dunk to see play. We've already got a pretty good artifact creature deck in blue and white, so I think this just falls right into that deck. It does the things that you want it to do, and it allows you to go get whatever cards you really need out of your deck. And because of that, I think this is certainly going to be a card that sees Standard play. Next, we've got some black cards for the day, and the first is Cryptcaller Chariot for 3 and a black mana. You get a vehicle. It's a 5/5 with Menace. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, create that many tap 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and it accrues for 2. So again, another card that generically is good if you're doing things that are wanting to get cards in the graveyard, maybe for animation purpose or for other purposes. This is a great card that goes with that, because when you're discarding those cards, you get the benefit of adding that 2/2 black zombie creature token every time you do that. And I think that in itself is going to make this somewhat playable in Standard. Next, we've got Bloodghast for 2 black mana. You get a Vampire Spirit. That's a 2/1. And this creature cannot block. This creature has haste as long as an opponent has 10 or less life. And it also has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, you may return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Bloodghast is a reprint, and it was very powerful in Standard when it was in previously, so I expect it to be another good card in Standard going forward. Next, we've got Quag Feast for 1 and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle. You mill 2 cards, then destroy the chosen permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. So a really nice way to get rid of something, and not necessarily have to have a kill spell to do it. And I think this has got some Standard playability. Now, again, the fact that it can also take out planeswalkers and vehicles, I think that's what will make it Standard playable as a sideboard option, most likely, against those vehicle and planeswalker decks. Otherwise, I think we right now still have better black removal that's targeting creatures, and we don't have to worry about conditions like having enough cards in the graveyard to kill something. All right, let's move on to our red cards for the day. First, we've got Boom Mobile for 2 and 2 red mana. You get an artifact. That's a vehicle. It's a 5/5. And when this vehicle enters the battlefield, Add 4 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. So it's a really not interesting card here because it crews for 2, so not that big of a deal in terms of getting it into a position where it's going to be able to attack. But you can also exert it for X 2 mana and a red mana. This vehicle deals X damage to any target. Put a +1/+1 counter on this vehicle. So what you can do in the late game, you're obviously going to pick up the 4 mana there, so you can always do this for, if nothing else, do 1 damage to any target with the 4 mana that's there. But if you've got other mana available, then you can actually turn this into a pretty nice burn spell. So you get your creature plus the burn there as well. And I think that might be enough, again, in a vehicle deck to make this playable. Okay, we got our first green card of the day in Aganosaur Rex for 3 and 2 green mana. You get a dinosaur. That's an 8/8 with trample. And you can cycle it for 2 and a green mana. When you cycle this card, put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature or vehicle. It gains trample and indestructible until end of turn. So I really, again, this is another nice ability on a card because green doesn't necessarily have a lot of ways to protect its creatures, but this is a way to do that. So if your opponent is going to kill one of your creatures, you can give it indestructible. It's also going to get those +1/+1 counters and also get trample. So because of that, I think this has got standard playability in the right green build. And we do already have a dinosaur deck in standard, so maybe this goes in there, and this is another way of increasing the power of that deck. One of the downsides of it right now is there aren't a lot of creatures that have trample, even though they're really big creatures. And because of that, sometimes, even though it has a critical mass of cards and creatures in play, it really can't do enough to win games. All right, let's go back to red for a moment, to Arcanautics Engineer for 1 and a red mana. You get a Goblin Artificer. That's a 2/2. It has Exhaust, and for 1, other creatures you control gain haste until end of turn, or you can spend 4 and you get to create a 4/4 red dinosaur dragon creature token with flying. So nice abilities on this. Again, this is one of those abilities that I really like. Because one of the things that we do have a problem with, particularly in the dinosaur deck where this I think would fit, is that you got a lot of really good creatures, but they don't have haste. And because of that, sometimes that allows your opponent to build up enough board state that your creatures, even though they're large, can't get through. But a card like this, I think, helps a lot because you're going to be able to give all of those creatures haste when you exhaust it. And because of that, you can maybe attack a turn earlier than you would otherwise with everything and really have an opportunity to do a lot of damage to your opponent. Next, we've got our multicolored cards of the day, and each of these is representative of one of the 10 teams. It's kind of the leader of that team. So for our Is It team, we've got Captain Howler, Sea Scourge for 2, a blue and a red mana. You get a legendary creature. That's a Shark Pirate. It's a 5/4. It has Ward of 2 and pay 2 life. So not only do you have to pay 2, but you also lose life when you target Captain Howler. You discard 1 or more cards. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you get to draw a card. So really powerful ability on Captain Howler here, where if you're discarding stuff, again, we've got a number of cards in standard right now that allow you to draw and then discard. So Captain Howler kind of fits in that style of deck and is a way of giving additional power to all your creatures, or 1 or more of your creatures when you do that. I think that, in a pirate deck probably makes this somewhat playable in standard. Next, we've got Achik, Emerald Radiant. For 3, 2 black and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's an insect druid and is a 3/3. When Achik enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. Whenever another insect you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on object. Each opponent loses 1 life. So it is 6 mana, so you're not going to get this out until the late game, most likely, unless you're able to ramp into it. But the abilities on this are solid, being able to create additional 1/1 green insect creature tokens based on the number of artifacts and or creatures you have in your graveyard. I think, it's possible you could be gaining 3 or 4 of those 1/1 insect tokens, and that might make this worth that 6 mana, especially when another insect you control dies. So maybe this is really focusing on being in an insect deck. You get to put that +1/+1 counter on object, and your opponent's going to lose life because of that. And I think that's decent in standard. Next, we've got Far Fortune End Boss for 2, a black and a red mana. You can legendary creature, that's a human mercenary. She's a 4/5, and it has Start Your Engine. So whenever you attack, Far Fortune deals 1 damage to each opponent. And by doing so, obviously you're going to activate your Start Your Engine ability. And then when you reach max speed, if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +1. So nice tie-in ability there. I'm not sure if this sees standard play, but I like the abilities on it enough to say that it has a chance to see play in a Rakdos deck in standard. Next, we've got Caradora, Heart of Alakria for 2, a green and a white mana. You can legendary creature, that's a human knight. It's a 4/2. And when Caradora enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a mount or vehicle card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So a great ability to get a desired mount or vehicle from your deck into your hand. So if one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature or vehicle you control, that many +1/+1 counter are put on it instead. So basically, anytime you put a +1/+1 counter on a card, then you get an additional one from Caradora. And I have a feeling that a lot of times you'll be using this to saddle things and get those abilities that go along with adding those +1 counters to creatures and vehicles. Next, we've got Menticant Core Guidelight for 1 white and 1 blue mana. You can legendary artifact creature, that's a robot, and its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control, and it has 3 toughness. Again, it's another card with the Start Your Engine ability on it. And when you reach max speed, whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, copy it. So incredibly a powerful ability on Mendicant Core. And I can see this definitely being a build around in an Azorius artifact deck, because the ability, once you reach max speed, paying 1 additional mana and making a copy of everything, that is really powerful. So in essence, you're going to get additional copies of everything because of its ability. And I like that a lot, assuming that we can reach that max speed ability. Next, we've got Colladine, Triumph Caster for a red and a white mana. You can legendary creature, that's a human pilot. He's a 2/3. And mounts and vehicles you control have haste. And whenever a mount you control enters the battlefield, it becomes saddled until end of turn. And whenever a vehicle you control enters the battlefield, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So I think Colladine is definitely going to go into any artifact deck that is built around mounts and vehicles, because giving them initially when they come into play the ability on them to be saddled or crewed is really important in standard, and that haste ability on top of it is going to make it so that on turn 3 you cast a vehicle or a mount, it's immediately going to be able to attack, and that's going to be a solid ability in standard. And I think based on the Chandra card we got, this card, I think that we will have a vehicle deck and or mount deck, probably in red and white, but it could also be in red, white, and blue. Because I think those Jeskai colors also lend itself well given the two cards that we're looking at. Next, we've got Sita Varma, Masked Racer. For a green and a blue mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human rogue and is a 2/3. Sita is Spitfire from the Magic Story. She also has an exhaust ability for X 2 green and a blue mana. You get to put X +1/+1 counters on Sita Varma. Then you may have the base power and toughness of each other creature you control become equal to Sita Varma's power until end of turn. So incredibly powerful exhaust ability on Sita. Right now we don't really have a particularly strong deck in Simic colors, but Sita might be enough to say, okay, let's go ahead and build one, because Sita could very easily in the late game just give all your creatures +3 or +4, and by doing that, that probably is going to be enough to beat your opponent. So I think that's where this is going to fit in Standard, and it's probably one of the better cards of the day we've seen in terms of the exhaust ability on it. Next, we've got Red Shift Rocketeer Chief. For a red and a green mana, you get a legendary creature that's a goblin pilot. It's a 2/3 with vigilance, and you can tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is Red Shift's power. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. Again, this is another one of those cards where it's only going to be activating abilities, but it does have an exhaust ability as well. So for 10 and a red and a green mana, you can put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So if we do have a situation where in the mid game you've got multiple cards on the field that are going to be able to give you mana specifically for activated abilities, I think then Red Shift might be good enough to see play in Standard, because being able to dump your hand, I know it's 12 mana, but the reduced cost of the ability, because you've got Red Shift up to 4 or 5 power by putting +1/+1 counters on it, I think makes it potentially good enough in Standard. All right, our last two cards of the day are Zahur Glory's Pass. For 1 white and 1 black mana, you get a legendary creature that's a zombie cat warrior and is a 3/2. It also has Start Your Engine, and you can sacrifice another creature to surveil 1. Activate only once each turn, so you can sacrifice and get that surveil in each turn. When it has max speed, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you get to create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So I like Zahur a lot, because anytime you're at max speed, you get to, in essence, replace any creature on the battlefield that dies, and that's a pretty powerful ability in Standard, that automatically replacing something. So in essence, you have a 2-for-1, so your opponent spends 1 card to kill something on the battlefield. You get immediately to replace that with a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and I think that's good enough to see some Standard play. And we are starting to see some more zombies, so maybe there is potential out there for a zombie deck as well. All right, and next we've got our last of our 10 racing teams, and this one is in Dimir colors, and this is led by Winter Cursed Rider. He's a legendary creature that's a human warlock. He's a 3/2 with ward of pay 2 life, and artifacts you control have ward pay 2 life, so that's a nice add-on ability. So if your opponent wants to target your artifacts, then they have to pay 2 life in addition to the cost of actually trying to kill something. It also has an exhaust ability for 2, a blue and a black mana. You can exile X artifact cards from your graveyard Each other non-artifact creature gets -X until end of turn. So this is a really powerful ability in the mid to late game where you in essence have the ability, if you've got multiple artifacts in your graveyard at this point, so maybe you've been doing some self-milling, and what that's going to do is, all of a sudden everything gets -4 -4 or -5 -5, and you're basically able to clear out the board of everything that's a non-artifact creature. And probably in this kind of deck, you're going to want mostly artifact creatures, and we already have some good ones in these colors that I think are ideal for this type of deck. All right, those were our rares from day one. We had a lot of them to talk about. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. You can click the link here to get access to the Mythic Rare preview video from earlier today, and also I put in a link to our Common and Uncommon video. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one.